Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester. I'm Director of Public Programs here. And today we have a really interesting program for you. Part screening, part artist talk, part gaming, and all totally fascinating. Yesterday, we opened a new exhibition called NOX High-Rise by artist Lawrence Lek. And today, we're lucky to have Lek here in person to talk about it and the greater project that the Hammer installation is part of. So I'm going to give you a little introduction. Lawrence Lek is a London-based artist, filmmaker, musician, and interactive designer. His practice engages speculative fiction through media installations, narrative soundscapes, sci-fi mythologies, and game design. He imagines the architecture, design, and engineering of future scenarios in which the limits between humans, machines, and artificial intelligence have been blurred. His work considers the ethical and political implications of the development of artificial consciousness in a world shared by humans, more than humans, and machines. Lek's immersive installation, NOX High-Rise, evokes a virtual world in which AI systems dominate the lives of humans and machines. In the installation's universe, NOX, which is short for Non-Human Excellence, is a therapy center controlled by Farsight Corporation, a fictional AI conglomerate, where sentient, self-driving cars with mental health problems are trained and treated to be put back into service. Today, we're going to start by a screening of 3 films from Lek's Smart City series, which laid the conceptual groundwork for NOX High-Rise, his current exhibition at the Hammer. The screening will be followed by a discussion of the role of film, video games, and architecture in his world-building practice in conversation with the Hammer's own curator, Pablo José Ramírez. And after the program, we invite you to join us for some light refreshments in the theater lobby, where we can continue the conversation. So now the artist is here to say a few words about the films we're about to see. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Lawrence Lek.
Hello. Thanks everyone for coming today. I'm just going to say a brief word about the 3 films that we'll see. So it starts off with this idea of really thinking about the problems and promises of technology, not just as this kind of like commentary or critique, but really as a way to think about, in which ways are the machines that we're making like a reflection and a mirror to our kind of innermost problems and hopes. So the reason that in my work I kind of choose these non-human protagonists as the main characters in the films is really, I think that rather than thinking of them as something like a separate other that we are creating, really all the like hopes and fears that we embed into our everyday lives become characteristics of these characters themselves. The most recent Smart City series is really about a speculative idea of the mental health problems of AI. And that idea kind of came about with my previous trilogy, which was this Sino-Futurist trilogy, which was set about 30 to 40 years in the future. As during the pandemic and, after various kind of global issues, I became more conscious about the increasing use of digital systems and technology in everyday work actually starts to affect our basically mental well-being. And so it would kind of make sense that these AI protagonists would also have their own problems. So Black Cloud, the first film, is about, it's a short film set in a fictional smart city called Sim Beijing. Sim Beijing is a full-scale replica of the Chinese, mainland Chinese capital that's built just to train self-driving cars. Of course, in LA, you have, bits of the city that are taken over by, automated delivery vehicles or Waymos. Quite often, AI companies specifically target these gray areas, these gray zones without so much legal protections in order to test their technologies. So Black Cloud, as the name suggests, it's about a depressed city surveillance AI that is having this existential problem because they don't have anyone, the city's empty, so they don't really have anything to do. Black Cloud is talking to their built-in therapist, an AI called Guanyin. Guanyin is named after the Buddhist goddess of compassion. In Mandarin, the Guanyin means the listener. So it also made sense to me that just as, people have mental health or like meditation or breath work exercises on their phones when they're stressed at work. The self-driving cars and city surveillance AIs also have these built-in therapists, not to achieve transcendence, but basically so that they act as better workers for their company. Just like, people get, free mental health checkups or massages at work. It's not just because, the entity cares for you, it's because it's going to make you perform better. So this is one of the, paradoxes that I was thinking about. After Black Cloud, it's the middle part of this saga, which is NOX. It's the 2 short videos from NOX, which are also being shown in the installation here, in which a self-driving car that we see in Black Cloud undergoes rehabilitation for misbehavior. So this is, I was thinking about various frameworks of how repair happens in everyday life. So one, I was thinking about like really posh therapy centers, like in the UK, I'm sure in California there's a lot as well. Equine therapy is a thing where, it's not verbal, it's not linguistic therapy, it's you learn to ride horses or take care of a horse, or you train an animal in order to kind of bond in certain non-language based forms of healing. So in NOX, the first video is about the test center, and the second video is about a self-driving car who has equine therapy with one of these horses. I mean, it is ridiculous, but also it seems, I thought about not just parallels between like the road movie and the Western in terms of genre, because, like the car represents in a lot of filmmaking, like a search for, a new life or an escape from the open road. And in the Western, the horse is this like traveling animal, represents like wildness and the spirit of, the exploration of nature. However, in the second NOX video, Equine Therapy, it's like when the self-driving car sees the horse, they don't just see this like, powerful animal. They also feel guilt, because when the car came along in, the early 20th century, in the late 19th century, the horse was the dominant mode of transport and, rural agricultural work and urban transport. And when the car came along, this motorized carriage, lots of horses got killed because they were no longer useful. So just like people talk about, AI and obsolescence and what we're going to do after these things, in my framework, the car sees the horse and they see the specter of their future self as this like luxury animal, just like, after MP3s, vinyl records get popular again. So maybe, I don't know, just thinking about it, maybe in the future people have like car therapy where they like drive a real car again, just like you have equine therapy. And in the final film, Empty Rider, everything goes south even more. And one of the self-driving cars, a security vehicle called Vanguard, tries to kill their owner, this human occupant, and the CEO of the AI company that created them. So, there's this whole like, Thanatos, like Freudian thing going on, like killing the father kind of thing. But it's framed as a court case where the self-driving car is on trial for the attempted murder of their creator. Of course, you get this in, was it like Blade Runner? Was it Roy kills like Dr. Tyrell and stuff like this? But, I was actually really thinking not just in a humorous sense or this like ridiculousness, but also in a way that these creatures that are currently being created currently have no rights, they have no agency. I'm sure people see videos of like, kicking over the robot and like laughing at it and stuff like this. And for me, I feel this kind of being, somewhat like Buddhist in my outlook, I feel this like compassion for these beings that are being made to perform well. And there's a line I think in the final film, in Empty Rider, where Guan Yin, the therapist, who's speaking on behalf of the self-driving car, saying like, like progress comes at the price of suffering. So one of these really cruel paradoxes is like, we're creating these things to be better, but part of the price of them becoming better is also their own suffering and destruction. I mean, in the case of a self-driving car, as the self-driving car gets more sentient, they also become increasingly aware at the price that their ancestors have paid. And this has, so many parallels with, in my opinion, like, civil rights movements and, things of awakening that happen because of self-consciousness about where a being is in relation to their community. So after this quite heavy series of films, I'll be having a talk with Pablo, and we'll be doing a playthrough of the NOX video game where you take on the role of being a trainee psychiatrist for these self-driving cars. So yeah, thanks very much for coming. I'll see you later.
How are you guys doing? Thank you for coming. It's good to be here on a sunny Sunday, so I appreciate you made it here. And thank you, Lawrence, for these past 2 weeks. It's been really, really fun and joyful and great to just spend some time with you. So as you know, we opened the show on Friday, so I hope you already saw it. Like, can you just raise your hand who saw the show already, just to have an idea? So kind of half of you. The show will be open for many months, so you'll have time. But we really wanted to use this time before Lawrence leaves us and goes back to London to just have a little chat and explore not just the exhibition that you see here at the Hammer, but think of his practice and some of the questions it raises, like at large. So I'm glad you got to see the films, and yeah, we'll have a little chat. Also, we will. Lawrence will show you some of the ideas and interactions with video games that he has been developing here. But I would like to start by just giving some context, and we've discussed with you, Lawrence, your relationship to contemporary art. And what we have here at the Hammer is, I guess you could call it a contemporary art exhibition. It's an installation with film and sound and video games. And something you mentioned at some point when we were talking about this show is how you feel that sometimes kind of like music or architectural design are somehow at the avant-garde of the new technologies, right? So digital rendering was already happening in architecture back in the 80s, or electronic synthesis and music. So contemporary art, in a way, feels, at least to me, that sometimes it's kind of trying to catch up with new technologies. But something that you have already said in the past is that contemporary art allows for a space of experimentation that probably you don't have in other disciplines, and also has the infrastructure, right? So will you say something about that, and also connecting to your experience in London, because it's a specific place in terms of cultural production and so on?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I mean, for me, I think art with a, let's say, capital A, it takes all forms and different genres, different styles. Sometimes those like drawing or making a mark is kind of, and it's an easily accessible thing that all you need is a mark making device and a surface to draw on, a cave wall, canvas, piece of paper or something. But I think what's a real, for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure what, let's say contemporary art or visual art has evolved in such a into a kind of industry, if we can call it that, that exists in parallel with different art forms. So, you have music, you have the music industry, game industry, film industry, and so on. I think these are always, things that you become aware of much later on. When you're a kid, you're just interested in stuff because it's fun, or your friends are doing it, it's captivating, it's, you went along somewhere and you discovered something. And for me, that process of discovery from, music, film, video games was really just, if I am honest about it, it's not like a formal process. It's just stuff that I happen to be interested in. And then fast forward like 30 years, I'm lucky enough to have it as my job, bringing these things together. But then when I have to explain what I'm doing to different audiences, it really depends on, it's to some extent, it's like a generational thing, but it's also a lot to do with I think sometimes expectations. So, for example, sometimes I have work that is shown in a gallery setting and then it goes into a film festival, and then later I make a game and then it becomes a performance. So sometimes, almost always, people come with certain, how should I put it, like genre expectations, right? So if you like a film, you like, I like science fiction, but I hate romantic comedy, but maybe I'm going to check that out. So I feel in a way like zooming out, it's like I like art forms of all sorts of different genres. And part of what makes being able to be like a contemporary artist interesting to me is that I can play with those different ones. And it's not even a, it's an intentional thing, but it's not, it's actually kind of an opportunistic thing, because it really is, I'm following my instincts, but also I'm following where opportunities come from. So, for example, this year I'm doing talks. I have this installation, this exhibition here, but I also do performances. And yes, I'm really interested in these different expressions of like time-based media, but also it's part of having lots of side hustles as being as an artist at the same time. Sometimes I have to make sure that, let's say with NOX and NOX High-Rise, I can realize the fullest manifestation of what that world is, but sometimes it will be a performance, and sometimes I release like music albums from the soundtracks. So the way I think about it is, in different, I guess, more industrialized creative industries, like where there are actual like franchises and actual stars and brands, like in a video game, you'd have the video game, but then you have like expansion packs, downloadable content and things like that. Of course, to be cynical, it's just, companies cashing in on their IP. But for me, it's an interesting way of, like, you just saw with the films, like being able to create this like ongoing body of work in I guess, an economic climate where there's so many things that make creators make smaller and smaller pieces of content, I guess. So, you have this spectrum from content to visual art, and of course it can be all the same stuff, like I'm asked to cut up bits of trailers for social media and things. So I'm always thinking about, like, yes, obviously in the kind of highest manifestation, it's art for art's sake, but also I am in some instances I feel like a content creator, because you have to be to kind of show your work. And maybe the final thing I'll say is that photography, filmmaking, the moving image took a very, very long time to be accepted as art forms, because they started off as entertainment. Photographs would be like, capture this moment, capture your wedding, capture this like gathering of people, and then only later on, like in decades later, in many cases, it was like, oh, let's consider this, art form in itself. So this boundary of cultural value is always shifting.
And Lawrence, would you say something more about your? I guess I'm curious on how important for you the kind of London cultural scene has been in your practice. And I'm saying that because, it's when I many years ago, when I first moved to London, I was just very impressed on how the kind of boundaries between genres were very like ambiguous and blurry, right? Music, people working with, I don't know, Afrofuturisms and writing incredible novels of science fiction, people writing philosophy around that. So I don't want to say it's just a London thing, but it is a very specific cultural scene.
Sure. I mean, to be, like a romantic notion is that it's this interdisciplinary cultural kind of melting pot, which is true. And it's equally true that it's the reason all of that rich inter-genre thing happens is because it's also, the dominant English-speaking colonial center from the 19th century. So, I mean, my family is Malaysian. I mean, my parents were born in Malaya, which was, colonial Malaysia at the time. So it's undoubted that, you can talk, oh, why is so much cool electronic music? Why is like jungle and drum and bass there? And a lot of that is the Jamaican diaspora. And it's like, why is the Jamaican diaspora there? It's because of empire. So, and then, in the 90s, there's a lot of like Talvin Singh, this like Indian influence electronic music thing. So the positive sense is, of course, this like culture of experimentation that is in between different can be like critical and literary, and it's a lot about the places people come from. But my observation as well is that the way like identity or this kind of notion is dealt with in America is quite different, because I guess my intellectual sphere is to do with like a kind of post-colonial or decolonial context that is reflected on in my work in kind of like oblique ways, whereas I feel just observing things the way that similar issues to do with like discipline, technology, and control by my American artist friends, it's the tone is very different, because the issues that people are dealing with technology and control are different. But at the same time, I really have the advantage of working as a musician, as a visual artist, and a filmmaker in London, in a way that just seems quite organic. And maybe the other thing I would say is I was always interested not just in the work, what work is, but also the biographies, the stories of how works got made as well. So I was studying architecture before, and it always felt like a really alien thing to me. Like, on the one hand, I really enjoy being in cool buildings, but on the other hand, it's also got this incredibly rich kind of mythological foundation about, the dawn of humanity, building structures to find a place on Earth. And then fast forward like however many thousand years, it's like property development. So for me, like, learning about the stories of how buildings got made. I mean, you have all this, case study houses in LA. You have this like wave of European diaspora, basically, like before, during, after the Second World War, that brought modernism and that kind of contemporary art to the United States. So learning about the stories of how works get made is really interesting. So for me, actually, my entry point into contemporary art was just reading like my favorite bands. Oh, they went to art school together and they started a band. It's this kind of thing that made me realize that, coming from like a non-cultural family, there are different routes into art making that make things accessible, or at least relatable, when you're not kind of from that world.
I'd like to talk about the films. And I think the first film you watched today was Black Cloud. And as I was saying earlier, while watching the films, I was just trying also to make sense of kind of the thinking behind it. And I think your work can be seen in different ways. It can be seen as literary theory. It can be seen as kind of a form of philosophy. It can be seen as art, visual art. And with Black Cloud, my interpretation on one hand is that you're raising questions around mind and subjectivity. Mm-hmm. In a very, very specific way. You are not really looking at a kind of like political sort of broader picture, which you later do with NOX. And talking about Black Cloud and this moment of towards the end of the film, where the AI therapy bot is asking, just you can split your mind in three, right? The coyote, the car, and the human. Mm-hmm. And that idea of like just you can be one and many at the same time. But at the same time, kind of like reflecting on this idea that in the end, that tomorrow will never come. Mm-hmm. So everything is a fiction, which in the then with NOX, I think you kind of have some kind of twist where you are looking at the broader picture and at like systems of control and putting somehow the human in the middle of the conversation as well, even if we don't see or hear a human voice in the film. What can you say about that? About this idea of fiction and this kind of like sort of utterly negation of reality in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just maybe talk about my thought process when I was making Black Cloud. So yeah, with Black Cloud, I was thinking not just about how the price of progress is, you have to work with systems that you might not necessarily like or agree with. And so that's kind of the existential dilemma that the surveillance system has, right? It's like, I'm so smart, I can think about everything, I can imagine anything, but at the same time, I have no body, I have no embodiment. In in a lot of robotics research, or in AI research really, there's a lot of debates and discussions about where is intelligence, like what is intelligence, right? What is intelligence? What is consciousness? These kind of eternal philosophical questions. And what some roboticists say actually is that there's no consciousness without a kind of embodiment. So there's no like splitting between mind and body like you have in Western philosophy and Descartes. However, I'm, like I mentioned earlier, kind of interested in this like Buddhist point of view that maybe the body itself is an illusion. So what Buddhist philosophy says is like, you as your identity is not who you think you are as your identity. Is like, you are not somebody who's born in a certain place to certain parents at a certain point in time. It's like you are a continuous thing that will always be unknowable. So that's kind of like the, kind of cosmic Buddhist view. In the kind of pop culture view, there's sometimes like the Matrix problem, right? The Matrix problem is like, how do you know like you're not living in a hallucination? My philosopher friends tell me that this is called Putnam's brain in a vat experiment, which is basically, how do you know that you're not a brain in a vat somewhere else imagining all of this happening? The reason I'm interested in these things is not just because they're interesting, but because they also make kind of sense as a scriptwriter. I'm thinking like, oh, wouldn't an AI who can't escape their bodily form be interested in like Buddhist philosophy because they feel a certain affinity to the idea that, oh, you're not a body, that's kind of okay? Wouldn't they feel identification with these like eternal questions of subjectivity and like, who am I? And I like that both from a kind of compassionate point of view towards these beings who might be suffering, but also as a kind of philosophical question. And Black Cloud also started as a thought experiment, talking to a it's called Eliza. Eliza was one of the earliest AI chatbots, basically. And what Eliza does, all caps, Eliza with a Z, you talk to Eliza, and Eliza says, can you describe the problem that you're having today? And you're like, I'm feeling sad. Eliza is not like a, super powerful AI. Eliza just reflects back what you're saying to you at you. So can you describe why you are feeling sad? And because Eliza is basically just a mirror, like a linguistic mirror, the idea is that that the subject like reveals everything that's happening through a program that simulates compassion or therapy, but is essentially just acting as a mirror. In the film, there's this idea of Solomon's paradox, which is, it's called Solomon's paradox, which is, why are you better talking to a friend about their problems and you can't apply the same things to yourself? So the way that the Black Cloud script was kind of generated was, really in dialogue with these systems, like literally as a screenwriter as well. But with NOX was, I made that about 2 years after Black Cloud. And I think it's also like, 2 years post-pandemic when the world was a bit different in a weird way that is quite hard to describe. And so because I thought that a lot of what was technologies of control became, how should I put it, like more ambient, more embedded, that relates to a shift, I guess what you were saying, in critical theory, there's this idea that you have, Michel Foucault would say you would have like prisons, schools, and hospitals, which are all structures that discipline the human body by keeping them captive in a certain location. But NOX kind of shifted that focus from this like disciplined society, like, NOX, this is a building, it's a prison, it's a training center, and it's also a school all at the same time. But that also shifts in NOX to being this society of control. Deleuze says that the shift from discipline to control is like, if discipline was about the prison, control is about passwords. Control is about like intelligent systems in which the prison isn't a literal physical object. It's a interface, basically. So the password becomes a thing. And actually, you see, like, for example, in NOX, when the Dakota the horse has a retina scanned, it's a world that is both a prison and is also like full of passwords as well. But with NOX, it was kind of blurring this scenography of enclosure with this kind of password system of surveillance. So I guess that's the theoretical side of what it is. But on a very basic level, it's a rehab center for self-driving cars where these ideas are all embedded at the same time.
And Lawrence, going back to this idea about societies of control and I guess human subjectivity and will, and I'm just thinking how to formulate this in a way that doesn't feel like too nerd of a conversation, but it's also fine.
We're already there.
Yeah, it's too late. And I think it's just fascinating because something I was thinking when watching your films is how also human subjectivity is out of the picture, but is at the center at the same time, right? And I'm saying this because, for instance, with NOX, like by displacing the human voice, there is a moment where you start, or at least I did, feeling some empathy for the car, for Enigma. And I was starting to feel sad or excited, or like there are kind of like a sense of projection, I guess, to feelings and kind of existential threats, and that's just connects to what you were saying, because I mean the whole kind of change between societies of discipline, Foucault, and societies of control, Deleuze, is that in societies of control, you don't realize you're being controlled. That's the whole thing, right? Like you don't realize that by opening your phone and kind of like using an algorithm, for instance, there is a kind of a constant push towards certain kind of normalization, right? And that's kind of the paradox of Enigma when it comes to the therapy's process, right? Because like even like with the horse, right? There is a kind of like embedment into these sort of different stages, and in the end, the car somehow mirrors our own feelings as humans, no? And that's I think that's what's most interesting about this is what you said about the like AI as an avatar. So the AI Enigma in this case is mirroring our own feelings as we watch the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think on a very kind of practical level, like different visual art forms privilege different forms of perspective, right? So there's both a linguistic perspective, like literally first person, right, which is I was in the test center and I saw these things. So in the three films, actually, you get all different kinds of narrative frameworks. You get a first person point of view, which is, self-driving car saying like, I was feeling these things. I went through this experience. You also get a second person point of view where you, kind of breaking the fourth wall here, is like, dear sponsor, Enigma voice log, thank you very much for coming. So you're being directly addressed. Then there's also, of course, the third person where, characters are talking to each other. So, of course, when you read a novel or whatever, these things, these points of view are so embedded into communication that you don't need any of these things explaining. But cinematically, like you have a first person perspective video game where because the player is controlling the perspective, the subjectivity is automatically assumed to be the player. Like the player is the viewer who is also the controller and also the character. Like the main character in a video game is the player. In cinema, like to have a first person perspective is actually quite, it's quite a deliberate thing that you get in horror movies quite a lot when you have this really subjective shot, like crawling along, that you want to feel that what the director is trying to do is make the viewer feel embedded within the world, to feel it. And in all these kind of art forms that I'm interested in is, what's being asked is like this, what's it, suspension of disbelief, right? So let's imagine that there's a world where horses take cars for a ride. Let's imagine there's a world where self-driving cars on trial. So you have the suspension of disbelief in terms of like a narrative, which you get in science fiction. But there's also a suspension of identity that I'm kind of asking people to have where, are you an AI? Are you like this car owner? Are you this audience coming to a museum? That is actually more aligned with this, how it is in role-playing games. You're not just an audience, you're not just a player, you are kind of all of these things simultaneously. And in a, how should I put it, in a formal sense, that's what I'm interested in. This idea, like I said, with Buddhist question of identity is like, we like to think of ourselves as, people from a specific space and time, but on a more broad level, we also have the capacity to empathize with different points of view, different characters who are nothing like us. And for me, it's actually something quite magical if, everyone knows this is pixels made on a laptop, but if you can feel something from pixels made on a laptop, that is actually quite a cosmic thing at the same time. And it makes me think there's nothing intrinsically unworthy of other forms of intelligence, like animals or like machinic or other things. Because for me, that understanding of that suspension of disbelief, not just in a narrative sense, but in a really, I guess, spiritual sense, is something that I try to capture somehow.
And going to this idea of, I guess, human will and participation and this sort of like existential mirroring. And I want to ask you something about NOX at the end, but let's, should we play?
In English. So, so the idea for NOX is really, this was the original building that the installation was shown in Berlin. And it's this like 3-floor former shopping center that I wanted to also make a kind of a character in the video game as well. And it's like an adaptation of this whole world that's currently on view upstairs. So the kind of first screen that people see is, what's it called? Like an establishing shot showing people that the building that they originally came to, that they literally just walked in the entrance, has been transformed in the setting into a self-driving car psychologist training center. So the role that people take within this is they're trainee AI psychologists. So they've been employed by Farsight, that's the AI parent company, to be trainers for disobedient self-driving cars. And this game is, it's like what do they call it? Like an onboarding game. So it's like, it's your first day at work and you're going to play this game. And the game is going to teach you how to be a better employee. So there's 4 different car models that you can choose, and each of them have a different personality. The personality, you can see like optimistic and social. So there's like melancholic, analytical, and quiet. These are based on what's it called, the like Renaissance humors, where they're like, you have like your bile is too high. That's why you're feeling emotional. So the idea for this set of cars is like, if you want a luminary, I don't know what equivalent that I don't really drive. If you want a luminary, you're like a corporate CEO, and you want this like relaxed and peaceful car who's not gonna like ask you annoying questions when you're on your drive on your way to work. If you're a kind of person who wants Genesis, you're like a speedy car who's like optimistic and it's like, yeah, we can go to the coast. That'll be awesome. Enigma, who you saw in NOX. Enigma is melancholy because they're a delivery driver basically. So they're the ones who work 24/7. They have like 2 minutes per package and they're kind of like subdued, but their problem is that they've used up all of their disk space, like taking photos of everything because they're not meant to do that. And Vanguard's the most screwed up one. Vanguard is a security vehicle who's irritable and impatient because they're just really angry at everyone. However, Vanguard is also going to retire soon, like forced retirement. So they really don't want to give up their job and their status, because what happens in this system is that you start off as like a fancy vehicle, like a luminary or like a vanguard, and then you kind of downgrade it after time before you like put out to pasture. So vanguard will become an enigma, and then enigma is going to become scrap. So we're going to just look at vanguard. So the goal of the game is to fix the car. So Vanguard has the lowest health, like 10 out of 100, because they're all like crashed, and has the worst mood because they're going to be scrapped. So you select the car, and then the game moves you upstairs. So in Berlin, this was the actual like scenography of the installation. Here, Guan Yin is training you as the player about how to be a better AI therapist. So basically, on the bottom left, you have N, which is your NOX coin. That's basically your budget allocation. So your boss has been like, you have 9 coins to give Vanguard better treatment and to fix them. So you can go to these different zones, which also corresponded to zones in the actual installation. In the inspection zone, you're having this car scan. And actually, if you remember from the video, in the video, the car is getting scanned. And what happens when the car gets scanned is basically they kind of tell you how they're feeling. It's like, the first stage of like, submit. Why do you want to talk to this person? You have to input your information. So yeah, Vanguard says, real work, okay, I'm no scanner, because, like Vanguard wants to have a job that lives up to their immense potential, even though they just crashed. So in the different treatments in different zones, some of them fix the health of the car, and some of them fix the mood of the car. So in a lot of like role-playing video games, you have like health and energy, or health and magic power. So the equivalent for this is health of the car and mood of the car. So yeah, I'll just spend half my budget, as you do, just repairing everything to restore both the health and the mood of Vanguard. The different cars react differently to different treatments. So in this case, repairing the security vehicle, because it's a police car, they're really vain about their appearance, they want to like look really shiny and new. So repairing their health also restores their mood. It's like, oh, I look great, so I'm feeling great as well. Some of the cars actually, like, you repair them and they don't really care how they look. So like you improve their health, but not necessarily their mood. So that's the kind of health treatment zone I'm showing. Like this kind of, speed running this game. And in the listening zone's the therapy zone. And remember that you're basically being this like corporate therapist. So as a player, your goal is to kind of convince the car that everything's great. So you can give Somnia to the car, or you can talk to the car for therapy. Somnia is like, it's like car Xanax. So Somnia restores the mood, but their health actually suffers a little bit, because you don't want to get them like addicted to this thing when they have to be like a security vehicle. So we're going to give, just spend a little bit, not too much. See, it's very cheap because healthcare. And then some of the effects, kind of like video games, have this real like, dopamine release feedback loop. Sound effects, glowing, you're feeling great. I'm so happy that the car's feeling better. They're going to like be more effective. So yeah, they hurts their health like a little bit, but we've kind of won at this point. So you have a go upstairs later on. And once that you've kind of finished the game, you can have talk therapy, but I'm not going to do talk therapy for the car because they're already feeling quite good. And if I use talk therapy, I'm going to use 3 more coins, which means I've used up like too much budget. And the company doesn't like when you use too much budget over what you have to do. So you can end the therapy. And what happens is you are going to get assessed by the parent company about how well you did. And so it's like, oh, the future is so bright, it's amazing, the car can get back on the road, and you've been on on time, under budget, you're going to be a great employee. So yeah, training complete. I made the game, so it's fine. A difficult, moody car back on the road, and cheaply done too. So it's like you're hired. So anyway, like the tone of the game is obviously like a bit more comedy versus the kind of tragic tone of the films. But I personally like that, having different moods for different kinds of experiences as well.
Is there? I'm just curious. Is there a best outcome of the game? Like, what would be the best possible outcome?
So in this version, like the best outcome is, I mean, it depends what you want to do, but the kind of best outcome is that you fix the cars on time. And I mean, that was a good outcome, for example. I mean, if you want the cars to be like really happy about
Because
their jobs until they get scrapped.
You're cheating because you know.
Exactly. I totally did that before. But what people have asked me is that, oh, how do I get more coins? I've run out of budget. And I'm like, it's a good question, but it's not that kind of game. It's like, you can't, sometimes you can go to your boss and be like, hey, Pablo, I've spent too much on the install. Can I get some more NOX coin to bump up the game? You might be like, it'll be better. I'm not really sure if we can do that. It's a bit late in the season. So it's just meant to give like a different angle. And also as part of world building, it's meant to kind of indicate that obviously there's the work in the show, but I'm also reflecting on the different ways people just interact with these systems or personalities. So for example, here you saw Guanyin, you saw Enigma, you saw Vanguard, but they're all similar characters in a different space. Of course, you get this all the time with like video game adaptations of mainstream films. They try and make the characters a bit more interesting, because to make a video game character interesting, it's like the protagonist generally like reacts to everyone around them. But sometimes they actually don't have any personality, so that, they become like a vessel for the player. But that would be a very bad thing in like a mainstream movie, because you want the hero or heroine or whatever to have a personality. Sometimes in a video game, that's the opposite. You want the main character to be a blank canvas so that you can project anything onto them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can we say something about the horse?
Yes.
There is this moment at the end of NOX where the horse is riding with the car, and we just discovered actually, and I was telling you that apparently with like horse therapy in humans, like echinotherapy, there is this sort of connection between the human heartbeat and the horse heartbeat. So the horse's heartbeat is supposed to be more stable. So when you're close to a horse, they kind of like provide a sense of calm, because your heart, the human heart, somehow empathize with that of the horse. The car is doing echinotherapy, but it's kind of the last stage of the process, mm-hmm. right? And then, the horse is guiding the car. And at the end, in this moment, there is this moment where Enigma is realizing that there had been other cars before, right? And Enigma is somehow the barrier of memories, of mm-hmm. past memories. Mm-hmm. And in that sense of realization of this sort of collectiveness, let's say, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. My feeling was, and again, kind of like going deep into the film's narrative, mm-hmm.
My
feeling is that there was a sense of like a spiritual transcendence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that spiritual transcendence, I thought it was just very interesting to think in with regards to AI, mm-hmm. right? Because if we are able to feel empathy for AI, and if we're decentering, I guess, our own personhood, then cars are also capable of a spiritual transcendence, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah, so in that, I guess what I was interested in that particular part from NOX, where there's, I'm interested in the idea of like the road movie or of the journey, and in the road movie there's generally like there's there's a literal journey along the highway down into the underground, and there's also the metaphorical journey, the journey of self-discovery, right? So those two things kind of happen in parallel. But there's the first NOX video, which is like horizontal, driving out onto the highway. But in the second journey, it's like descent underground, and of course, on a mythological level, that's like descent into the underworld, into the past, into the ancestors, frankly, into the grave as well. Not just the grave or the death of the individual car, but the rediscovery of all of the rest, of all of the others. Apart from it being like a, powerful image, I was also really interested in this idea that, people talk a lot about intergenerational memories, intergenerational trauma, epigenetic memories, and, do we have any intrinsic memories assigned at birth as human beings? Of course, people say that, you have your older like medulla reptilian brain that's like scared of snakes and, is like has this fight or flight response. But then there's a lot of arguments, no one knows, as to what extent you inherit memories, right? Is that something that a particular tribal affiliation or ethnicity or whatever has from a certain point in time? Or if your grandparents or parents had trauma, do they kind of teach you, or do you inherit it like genetically? Nobody knows. But I thought that if that is a discussion amongst people, how much more accelerated that would be if you generate 10,000 generations in an hour. What would happen if you simulate 10,000 car crashes in crash test centers on, some insane AI simulator? You would have this accelerated rate, not just of this like tragic sense of your ancestors being destroyed for you to exist and the guilt of that. You would also have a very different kind of, maybe sublime kind of intergenerational memory that would be, maybe for people around here, you go back to your kind of ancestral hometown or like the place where like your ancestors, and sometimes you have no connection, but sometimes you do feel some kind of connection. So I just thought that just like we might have that connection with the unknown of our past, of course, a machine might have the same thing as well, especially if, I guess what I'm trying to say with this accelerated timescale is like, you have, one dog year is like 8 human years or whatever. So maybe like 1 human year is like 10,000 AI years that's been trained in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And then because they're also trained to have this idea of compassion and empathy, they would be, basically hypersensitive, like hyper empathetic. But that might be nice as a personality trait, but that might not be desirable as an employee, as a kind of service machine, So I think that huge gap between what this being could be and what they are assigned to be is a huge gulf that, people deal with all the time. So I just thought this kind of future creature would also have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lawrence, and thinking about kind of wrapping up and give some space for Q&A, let's talk about the show here and about the space in relation to NOX. I think all of this it also kind of gives us some base to think of space and think of the exhibition. And we were trying to, I guess, respond to many questions. And when we started working on this show, you started to kind of design the second chapter of NOX, which is what we have here, the hammer. And thinking on how, in a way, the space, the architecture, the design of the space can also respond, being conversational, or be actually a manifestation of what you see on the films. Would you say more around that, and probably in relation to the show here?
Sure. So I guess how I usually work with installations and with games as well and projects is that I try to work episodically. So I, stitch together narratives over time, but I work by trying to develop the spatial language of each show as the artwork as well. So, when I was a student, I was really inspired by, land art, light and space, like installation, monumental sculpture. This idea that the place that is being made is not just this generic modernist thing that can be replicated anywhere. It's actually something that is, site specific. So when I thought of, the relation of, I guess, LA and Berlin, not just as places that deal with like cars and automobiles in their history in different ways, I thought of creating a place, a space at the Hammer that is both specific, like a high-rise, and also completely generic at the same time, so that the installation in the museum becomes like this in-between space, in between the kind of fictional reality of the cinematic world and between the physical reality of, walking or kind of moving through the space. So in the Gallery 5 where it is, there was this idea that what was 3 floors in the original NOX installation might be kind of 3 separate zones. Like you have a kind of car park entrance, and then you have this like interior of this apartment building, and then you have this balcony for the apartment building. It's meant to evoke not just the kind of structures of kind of control and discipline and that kind of thing, but also to say like, that's what corporate employees do when they get sent to Shanghai to, tweak their self-driving cars. The company will have an apartment that they put them up in that is kind of branded like the company a little bit with like corporate stationery, to make that alien feel more at home. And now just thinking about it, like this idea of the first person perspective within the world and within the work is not just a condition that video games gives us. It is also, to me, the deeper kind of, the wandering condition is the status of being an alien, basically. An alien in the Border Patrol sense is like one not from here. In the science fiction sense, it's, from here is this planet. But this sense of perpetual wandering and alienation that I feel a lot, I thought I would inject that into some of the design of the space and of the world as well. I mean, not just as this self-indulgent thing, but hopefully as I thought like a kind of a universal idea of trying to rediscover who you are and why you're here. So the NOX High-Rise idea is it's meant to somehow evoke that. It's obviously a media installation, but also it's like when you move into a new apartment, when you like stay at a friend's place or something, it's like a space that's kind of familiar and very deeply strange at the same time. So that's kind of, but that's all, I guess, almost like subliminal in the design of the place.
Yeah, and something I think you accomplished quite well is that, we're used to seeing shows and be spectators, right? We visit a show, we see things, but there is this kind of like sort of always distance between what we see the art object and ourselves. And in this installation, you are almost like as the game, right? You're really aiming at people to interact in a way with the space. And the way you do this is, for instance, by thinking of the space as this sort of infinite loop, right? So there is this, for those who saw the show, there is this kind of countdown when you come into the space. So you know that, there are 8 minutes for the work to kind of start again. And depending on where the countdown is, when you come into the space, you will need to move differently, behave differently in the space. There is this kind of launch space. You can watch 2 films, but there is also this little kind of surveillance camera and a video game. So what is interesting about this is to think of the space as the art object itself. The art object is not just the film. The whole thing, the whole installation is the art object.
No, definitely. I remember when I took my first couple of like sculpture classes, and like I was surprised and also not surprised at the same time that there would be entire seminars dedicated to like the plinth. I was like, it's a lot of attention. It's like but then I realized, like, in sculpture, of course, so much is about like the relationship of the object to the everyday world, or, you know, what people would say, like the sacred to the profane world. That, of course, the plinth is the thing that elevates it, you know, the stage, the plinth that makes the frame that elevates the thing into art. And I was like, okay, I can think about that for a while. And then later I learned that, then, you know, monumental sculptors would make an even bigger deal about like no plinth, right? The world is like the world plinth, which is fascinating, but also like, you know, coming from this more like, you know, school of architecture, I'm like, it's a little bit obvious, you know, as in, why make such a big deal out of it? But now I realize that the reason you have to make a big deal out of it is like, you have to think about, where does the world end and where does the other world begin, right? So in the installation, there's these, which I work with a scenographer, Celeste Berliner, and we're really thinking a lot about what are the thresholds, you know? So in terms of like, what would Foucault say about the show, right? So it's framed, it's an installation framed in a museum that has a gate, and you enter the gate and you're in a liminal space before you're in the show, and you see the timer, which is this like, I guess, control interface saying like, you can enter, but you can also wait. So it's this like liminal physical space, but also a liminal temporal space. Because of course you go to a film, you know it starts and it ends. You play a video game, you know you can maybe play it, you can save it, and you can continue where you left off. I think part of the opportunity and the challenge of working as a media artist in an institution is like, how do you deal with, very simple, like how do you deal with time, right? The question of how you deal with space is, you can solve that through like physical means. But the question of how you deal with time is, it's a different kind of challenge, because some people want to know exactly when the thing starts, when is 000 for that world to begin. And so with the show here, I just thought it was a really interesting challenge to try and think of both of these framings. Like, I have this weird cinematic universe thing, whatever it is, that I have to frame in a space and time in as hopefully immersive a way as possible, given that there's not an infinite amount of resources to do that as well. And that's why I wanted all the videos, the game, the scenography to all be happening in real time, because, you know, that's the that's one kind of simulation, this perfect simulacrum or copy of reality, that I'm trying to use the exhibition space as, I guess, a kind of medium in itself.
That's a great way to open up for Q&A. Questions?
First of all, brilliant, hilarious script writing. I'm a script writer, so. And a couple questions. So recently I read a book, and you probably do these kinds of books. There are books that are trying to demystify AI to people who don't work in it, like co-intelligence, living in work. There's a whole series of these that I'm starting to try to figure it out. So I'm assuming that sort of started you going along this moral existential dialogue. That's one question. Second one, you know that they used to bury, in many cultures, they would bury the ancestors under the house so that would inform the generations that came afterwards, which I think there's some loop connected to that in this also. And lastly, just a thought that if you're talking about plinths, maybe you're also talking about apopatreic herms, if you know what I'm talking about, the herms that were put up so you can continue to have an erection. So that the idea this was the Hermes, Mercury, Herm, the god of communication, was also a priapic god that you worshipped. And so in ancient Roman colonial places, you would see Hermes everywhere to protect the male agency, let's put it that way. So those are the thoughts that I had watching this, and it's absolutely hilarious.
Thanks. First, okay, let me try and remember. Okay, first, what started me thinking about AI was not actually the kind of like guide to demystifying AI kind of thing. It was actually like about 10 years ago now, like the previous series to this was called the Sino-Futurism series. And it was around the time that there was this like a Go match between Lee Sedol and DeepMind, where, you know, human Go master plays like AI Go program, who's going to win? AI won. But it got me thinking about this like idea of this crisis of creativity. Because I remember as a kid, there was Gary Kasparov who played Deep Blue twice. He won the first one, lost the second one. But it was this kind of spectacle around this competition between the human mind, creative mind, and AI. But I won't go into it too much, but that really made me think, like, in the context of East Asia, isn't it weird that the very same things that are talked about with AI, like copying, working all the time, good at computers, playing video games, capable of labor, exactly the same critiques and criticisms that are said about China, basically. It's hilarious, but it's also incredibly true. The very same ways that machine learning progresses, working 24/7 for basically no money with very little labor rights, etc., and no dehumanized, is really the way that China is framed in a very real sense till today. So I thought that rather than and taking a cue from like Afrofuturism and Gulf futurism, I thought rather than appealing to different ways of kind of humanist appeal, I thought that maybe what would characterize Sino-Futurism, by which I mean a kind of vernacular Chinese approach to technology and, you know, speculation in the future, would be to actually adopt AI as the protagonist in these things. So rather than say, hey, Chinese people are creative too, be like, what about if we're not creative and we just copy loads of stuff? And what if this idea of artistic practice can actually emerge from this very different sense, not of originality, but of copying? So anyway, that previous trilogy was really all about this. The films was, there was a video essay called Sino-Futurism. There's a film called Geomancer, which is about an AI satellite who wants to become an artist. And there was Idol, which is a singer employs an AI to ghostwrite her new album, which in 2025 does not seem weird. But this was all like kind of pre-pandemic stuff. So I thought with the Smart City series, instead of dealing with this speculative future, I would deal with like what might be happening today, as people started asking me, oh, have you seen what they're doing in San Francisco or in like, or in Hangzhou in China with Alibaba and so on. So that was the kind of context of the interest of AI. It's actually it's less of a what to do about it, and it's more to do with like, what does it mean in terms of identity somehow? The second question, I can't quite remember. And the third question about this idea of, well, basically, having the plinth as like, how should I put it? This symbolic male fertility thing. It's interesting because, in different cultures, the deal with the origin of the world in this kind of like, yonic phallic terms, and there are different symbols for both of these. Clearly, like the plinth is one of these symbolic things. And of course, like in how should I put it? In city design and development, there's this idea that when you lay the foundations of a home or of a city, it's a cosmic event that's happening, which kind of relates to what I was saying with the exhibition space. In 12 months' time, there'll be something else completely different in the exhibition space. So what is it that is unique about that place today? That, I don't know, but it's something I'm interested in as an installation artist. Yes. So that's the underworld. Yeah.
Thank you. Someone else? We might have like 5 minutes. If any lingering question.
Hi, I've very much enjoyed the presentation, and I just want to ask you if you could speak a little bit about how you made the choices to draw on corporate practices, because it's obviously it's smart cities, but what I found so interesting was the corporate connections, and I think a lot of people can really relate to them. And I think that the best outcome is a golden parachute.
So it can retire with like endless charging points. Yeah, I think maybe maybe one thing about corporate framing, if we think like really pop culture, I guess, just growing up, I've never thought about it that much, but like growing up, I mean, my parents used to work for an airline, so in a way, like when I started working as an artist, you know, there's a big tradition, obviously, of like institutional critique, corporate critique, and critique of globalization, which obviously I, you know, agree with in ethical terms. But at the same time, I thought like in a sense, like I am a product of a corporation. I'm not an AI, but I'm a product of like the fact that my parents met by working in the same company, and then I was talking to my dad and my grandparents worked, because the way it worked back then is that if you're from the same dialect group, you would work in the same kind of like dialect group food factory, and that's how they met. So I thought, in a sense, there's nothing contradictory about thinking about a corporation as like a very important part of even biography. That is also, you know, does not lessen the kind of significance of it. And at the same time, in so many, let's say, science fiction films, there's always a big evil corporation, right? There's like Tyrell Corporation in Blade Runner. There's Cyberdyne Systems in Terminator. There's the Wayland Corporation in Alien. You know, there's always like big evil corporation that does big evil things. And I think in the context of the 70s and 80s, where a lot of these filmmakers were making these work, the corporation was also a stand-in for like the government, you know, the conspiratorial, shadowy entity that's like pulling the strings behind the scenes. So in my work, I thought like, what if I kind of take that seriously? Because it's funny now, because so many big tech companies, like the CEOs and like whatever, they're actually really inspired by science fiction. They're like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do like one of those megacorps? And they do. So it's not like different from actually really affecting reality. It's like, what if we could make a smart city that, you know, has no people in it? They do that nowadays. But I thought, it's a really interesting thing as a screenwriter, as a world building, to think about that proposition seriously. So if you saw at the end of Empty Rider, for example, Empty Rider has like Farsight Corporation there. So I thought, after doing this Sino-Futurist series, what if I start Farsight as my production company, underfunded, and kind of, it's like method acting, except I'm running this like really small entertainment company that does projects in museums and galleries, so that I can actually understand how a corporation thinks, because that's useful as a screenwriter. And when I was looking at the history of the corporation, from, you know, the Dutch East India Company to the, you know, British colonial companies in India and in America and in East Asia, the corporation is what philosopher Graham Harman calls like a hyperobject. The corporation, it's a being, it's like a creature that has all the hallmarks of being like a living thing. You could say like a virus, because they can own property, they can live longer than any human being. They have their own behavior. They have their goal, which is to like create profit. And they live, in the case of the East India Company, they can live for hundreds of years. So it made me think of like having the corporation not just as its representation in older science fiction films, but as the real antagonist in this world. That, of course, you would like to say, oh, person X is CEO of this tech company, so that human being is the problem. But it's like that human being is the front interface of a much bigger problem. And that bigger problem, people talk about problem of like capitalism, of like whatever society. But it made me think about this, I guess, world building as something much deeper and more complicated than thinking like, oh, there's that bad person and they're to blame, which is actually really, I think, a lot of conspiracy theory films, like, was it like Parallax View, All the President's Men, all that kind of 70s conspiracy theory cinema had this very same idea. It's like this noir thing, like you don't trust the government, you can't trust anybody. And I think those science fiction films that I was mentioning also have that same vibe. Like it's this world that you can't trust anyone or anything. Everybody's like an unreliable narrator. And so how do you navigate that world? And so the corporation for me is like this entity that's surrounding the work as well. Happy Sunday.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. This was fun.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for coming. Don't forget to see the show before you leave. And coffee and tea outside.